Okay, so we're going to look at text 2.2, Mum and Me and Mum by Maya Angelou. Before we think about the gap for this one, it's really important contextually to have a bit of understanding about who Maya Angelou is. So she has a really tumultuous early life. She is raped at the age of 8, and when she tells people about it, her uncles then beat her attacker to death, and she doesn't speak for 5 years. So there's a teacher who she kind of credits with getting her to speak again. And then at the age of 16 she gets pregnant. She has a son at the age of 17, and kind of early adulthood for her is quite a tumultuous time. She works as a dancer. She is a sex worker for part of the time as well, and then eventually she gets found when she's working in the clubs by a theatre company, and she becomes an actress, and then it's later on really that she becomes a writer. And she's an incredibly high profile in America kind of campaigner and supporter of black women in particular, and the civil rights movement. If you haven't read I Know Why Cage Bird Sings, which is her first autobiography, it's really worth reading, and it's a very famous book. So this extract is about when she was 22, so it's about her earlier adulthood. So she would have had a son, which she talks about this time, her 5-year-old son, and she is living in San Francisco. She gets married in 1951, which is, I think, when she's 22, 23, so I'm kind of assuming that's happened, but I can't find out for sure definitely, and that's quite a short marriage, I think, from 1951 to 1954. But she's very much in San Francisco working as a dancer at the moment that this extract happens. So it's an extract from one of her autobiographies. Okay, they list her as an author, poet, dancer, actress and singer, so she did have this kind of incredible life. The gap, so the genre is a printed book form text. The audience then, she's a really well-known literary figure, so we're going to have fans of Maya Angelou, those who've got interest in her as a writer or a celebrity, obviously people who are interested in kind of African American rights as well, and then just general readers of autobiography, or kind of like a literary audience in general, and it is a very literary text. The purpose, as with any autobiography, is to recount and share the details of her life with a view to publication, and it's obvious when we read it that this has very much been crafted and structured. She's also reflecting on how her career developed. Throughout, the kind of references are grounded in American culture. Obviously that's a big part of who she is, and we can see that in the kind of lifestyle that she leads, and the food that they're eating, and in the linguistic choices, and in some of the Americanisms. Okay, so we start with this prepositional phrase here. By the time I was 22, I was living in San Francisco. Now, I think that prepositional phrase is really emphasising her youth. This is her early adult life. I had a 5-year-old son, 2 jobs and 2 rented rooms with cooking privileges down the hall. What we can see here is that despite the fact that she's really young, she's only 22, we get this listing sentence which really emphasises all of the responsibility that she's got, okay? My landlady, Mrs. Jefferson, was kind and grandmotherly. Okay, so here we've got these descriptions, kind and grandmotherly, that really foregrounds her maternal quality. She seems like a really lovely lady, Mrs. Jefferson. She was a ready babysitter. So we've got that kind of noun phrase there that tells us that she was kind of very willing to help out, and insisted, so that verb choice shows, it suggests a kind of lack of choice, on providing dinner for her tenants. Her ways were so tender and her personality so sweet that no one was mean enough to discourage her disastrous culinary exploits. So this verb choice here, insist, really kind of foreshadows that her cooking is not going to be great. So we've got this kind of juxtaposition between her kind of lovely personality with these adjectives, tender and sweet, and her disastrous cooking. Okay, and I think there's maybe a kind of like an element of chaos in it as well. So spaghetti at her table, which was offered at least 3 times a week. Okay, so we know with that embedded clause that it's something that you have to eat quite often, was a mysterious red, white and brown concoction. Okay, so we've got some real kind of literary language coming through here, which creates this kind of irony. And so it's mysterious. Well, she's criticising it, isn't it? It's kind of obscure, it's inexplicable, nobody knows what it is. It's also a concoction. So it suggests it's something being cooked up like you would in a cauldron or in a science lab. Okay, and that definitely implies an element of chaos. There is definitely supposed to be a kind of a sense of humour in the way that she describes the food here. We would occasionally, so that adverb's sort of creating some humour, isn't it? Encounter an unidentifiable piece of meat hidden among the pasta. So there's not much meat there. It's obviously, she's living quite a poor existence, and the meat being unidentifiable certainly suggests it's not of the best quality, doesn't it? There was no money in my budget for restaurant food, so I and my son Guy were always loyal, if often unhappy, diners at Chez Jefferson. Okay, this juxtaposition here is again, I think, intended to create some humour. Okay, so they're loyal but unhappy because the food's not great. And this kind of French expression is definitely supposed to be ironic. Okay. My mother had moved into another large Victorian house on Fulton Street, which she again filled with Gothic, heavily carved furniture. The upholstery on the sofa and occasional chairs were red, white-coloured mohair. Oriental rugs were placed throughout the house. She had a live-in employee, Popper, who cleared the house and sometimes filled in as a cook helper. So we've got this juxtaposition, haven't we, straight away from the first to the second paragraph between the sort of actually quite financially difficult, quite arduous sense of her life, contrasting with her mother's wealth and extravagance. Now, she explains right at the end of the extract that she refused to accept any help from her mum. So it's not that her mum's kind of cruel to her in any way, but Maya Angelou feels like she needs to have that kind of authenticity, that she does things for herself. So we've got this adjective and adverb that suggests a degree of extravagance. It's another large Victorian house, which she's again filled with this kind of furniture. These little bits, large, Gothic, heavily carved, red wine coloured mohair, oriental rugs, all indicate a sense of kind of wealth and luxury. And there seems to be perhaps like a little bit of a detached voice, I think, in the way that she's describing her mum, particularly when you contrast it to the really tender way that she talked about Mrs. Jefferson. It's kind of this is a bit detached. It's definitely a kind of descriptive literary voice. So despite her not accepting financial help from her mother does help her in a kind of pragmatic way. So she goes on to explain that mother picked up Guy twice a week and took him to her house, where she fed him peaches and cream and hot dogs. But I only went to Fulton Street once a month and at an agreed upon time. Okay, so we've got quite a formal noun choice in mother, my mother. Okay, my mother was just above there, which gives us an air of kind of formality, doesn't it? Maybe suggest a slightly distanced relationship. We get this list here, peaches and cream and hot dogs, and notice the repeated use of the conjunction and, really creating a sense of luxury, that these were like lovely things to have. And there's definitely that's part of kind of American culture, the food that she is giving him. And then we get this adverb, but I only, okay, so she doesn't go very often, went to Fulton Street once a month. So we get that adverbial phrase, at an agreed upon time, that adjectival phrase. Now that adverb, that adverbial phrase and adjectival phrase all suggest maybe like a bit of a distance in their relationship, because there's a kind of sense of forced regularity. So on one hand, the son sees her a lot, but Maya Angelou doesn't see her mother very often, and there's a contrast in that regularity, isn't there? She understood and encouraged my self-reliance, so that's important. Okay, so again, it's not that the mother is kind of cruel in any way, it's that Maya Angelou is very much determined to be self-reliant. And I look forward eagerly to our standing appointment. So eagerly kind of contrasts with the formality that we've had here, doesn't it? This adverb suggests that they kind of enjoy a close relationship, that she looks forward to seeing her mum. But I would say that juxtaposes the noun appointment, which makes their relationship sound quite formal. On the occasion, she would cook one of my favourite dishes, One lunch date stands out in my mind. I call it Vivian's Red Rice Day. Okay, so the capitalization here really shows the kind of significance of this to her, that this is something that she obviously really enjoyed. Okay. When I arrived, and then also, this sort of the simple sentences here, these declaratives, I think are kind of drawing attention to this moment. You know, we've had quite a lot of descriptive sentences beforehand. Here we've got these simple declaratives, and they really emphasize that this is an important moment. When I arrived at Fulton Street House, my mother was dressed beautifully. Her makeup was perfect and she wore good jewellery. So we've got this descriptive phrasing, dressed beautifully, and they've also got this sort of triad of 3 different things that all present her as sort of well presented and attractive. After we embrace, now that verb shows that there is a closeness there, despite this kind of seeming formality about how they organise their time together. I washed my hands and we walked through her formal, dark dining room and into the large, bright kitchen. Again, we've got these adjectives giving it a kind of literary voice and creating a sense of kind of affluence and opulence. Okay, obviously her mum is much better off than her. Much of lunch was already on the table. Vivian Baxter was very serious about her delicious meals. So here we've got these short single sentence paragraphs, and I think that is because it's showing us the importance of this meal and the ritual to both of them. So obviously Maya's been really looking forward to it, and Vivian is very serious about it. It's really important to her to cook this delicious food. So look at that adjective for her daughter. On that long ago Red Rice Day, capitalised again, my mother had offered me a crispy dry roasted capon, no dressing or gravy, and a simple lettuce salad, no tomatoes or cucumbers. A wide-mouthed bowl covered with a platter sat next to her plate. She fervently blessed the food with a brief prayer and puts her hand on the platter and her right on the bowl. Okay, so let's look at this. We've got these kind of okay, so on one hand we've got these descriptive details like crispy dry, gently loosened, revealed, mound, decorated finely, and all of these give a literary voice, but they also show her kind of love of the food. And there's a sense of ritual here as well, that she goes to her mum's once a month and there's this like ritual of cooking this delicious food. We've also got a platter, so a noun there, and a wide mouth bowl, so that noun phrase with the pre-modifier wide mouth, which really give it a sense of grandeur as well, don't they? And that's reinforced with the adverb, she fervently blessed the food. Okay, so she's doing it with great enthusiasm. She's blessing it, so there's that kind of religious element. And the fact that she does it fervently also has religious connotations. Okay, and what that's doing is it's really showing the power of the ritual. This is kind of like a performance, like a religious rite. And then we've talked about all of these kind of descriptive details and the mound of, and we've also got glistening, which I'd missed out there, red rice. So we've got all of these kind of adjectival phrases, adding that detail. And then she goes on, so there's all this other food, but she creates a juxtaposition between the chicken and the salad. So she's told us actually that the chicken was a crispy dry roasted, okay, but really it's the red rice that she was finding super delicious. So the chicken and salad do not feature so prominently in my taste buds memories, but each grain of red rice is emblazoned on the surface of my tongue forever. So that juxtaposition is just, it's just there to kind of really highlight the deliciousness of the rice. The verb emblazoned is interesting, isn't it? Because it means to kind of decorate in bright colours, or to celebrate and to extol. So on one hand, she's kind of celebrating it, but it's also red rice, so it works kind of both ways, okay? That it's kind of bright, but also that she really wants to kind of celebrate it. And what she's doing here is she's showing us the power of the food and the pleasure which she draws from it. So in this next section, we get sort of this sensuous semantic field that has a lexis drawn from the pleasure in enjoying food. And obviously, if we're thinking in terms of text cohesion, this really contrasts with the landlady's food, which was described in the opening. So we get gluttonous, greedy, offered the seduction of her favourite food. 2 large portions of rice sated my appetite. So all of these things are kind of giving us the sense of the sensuousness, the deliciousness, which actually she uses next. lips, the deliciousness of the dish, and you've got that alliteration there as well, which is really giving it those kind of literary connotations and really there to foreground what a wonderful sensory experience it is for her. Remember also, most of the time she's eating really disappointing food. 3 times a week she's eating this gross pasta that her landlady is cooking, so we can see why she's kind of taking such pleasure from this. And it makes her long for a larger stomach so that she could eat 2 more helpings. So it's really delicious. And then we get this little exchange about her and her mother. Okay, my mother had plans for the rest of her afternoon. So again, there's a sense of formality in their interactions. Her mum seems maybe quite disciplined, methodical, purposeful. So she gathered her wraps and we left the house together. We reached the middle of the block and were enveloped in the stinging acid aroma of vinegar from the pickle factory on the corner of Fillmore and Fulton Street. So here we've got another sensory experience. So we could say in the extract that kind of characterises the voice. We get the sensory experience of the landlady's food, of the mother's food, and now of the pickle factory. There's a contrast, isn't here, because these adjectives, stinging suggests it's kind of painful, it's uncomfortable. I had walked ahead, so kind of we've turned into quite a sort of simplistic recount of what happened here. My mother stopped me and said, "Baby." Now there's diminutive and the direct speech here. So the diminutive is showing us affection, isn't it? And all of a sudden we come to see her mum in a different light. She seems really kind and maternal. We get this intimate moment. Now also, as well as changing to a simplistic recount, I think these declaratives are maybe indicating that we're about to be told what was quite a pivotal, life-changing moment for her. And it's tied into what her mum says to her next. So she says, "Baby, I've been thinking, and now I am sure you are the greatest woman I've ever met." So again, that reinforces this idea of her mum as this kind of kind. It gives them a sense of intimacy. Now I am sure, so there's certainty there. We get the superlative greatest, so obviously she really thinks highly of her daughter, and then the adverb ever reinforces that certainty. And then we go back into the descriptive voice. So I looked down at the pretty little woman with her perfect makeup and diamond earrings and a silver fox scarf. So all of those things, we've got that kind of triad again of the makeup, the earrings, the scarf, okay? All of that reinforces the composed and elegant nature of her mother. And the descriptive phrasing, some might think, shows her kind of mother's detachment in some way, but I think whilst there's a formality in their relationship, it also becomes evident that her mum really cares for her, or she wouldn't have put all the effort into cooking the food and have made sure that she kind of told her this positive thing that she thought about her. She was admired by most people in San Francisco's black community, and even some whites liked and respected her. So what we've got there is a kind of oblique reference to the civil rights movement. Okay, that there's obviously this difference between how black and white people are treated. Remember, the civil rights movement doesn't really initiate until the 1960s, and this is set in the 1950s. She continued, "You are very kind and very intelligent, and those elements are not always found together. Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, and my mother. Yes, you belong in that category. Here, give me a kiss." Now these are significant figures, okay? And what that does is she's comparing her to these great women. And look, interestingly, in that triad, she puts her own mother, okay, so the grandmother, alongside it, okay. What those comparisons do is it really emphasises to Maya Angelou the greatness of her potential. And actually that becomes true, you know, she was this incredible woman in terms of America's 20th century history. And like her poem "And Still I Rise" is just amazing, and you should definitely read it along with "I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings." Okay, and then we get this shift. Okay, so she gives her this lovely comparison, and then after this sort of very long more descriptive sentences, we get this simple declarative here: "Give me a kiss." So that imperative really gives, so she's still in control when she's offering affection. So obviously we see that formality in their relationship, but also it's affectionate. So whilst it's formal, that affection is there. She kissed me on the lips and turned and jaywalked. That's when you walk across the road, not at the crossing. So there's a sense of rebelliousness about her mother there, perhaps. across the street to her beige and brown Pontiac. So that really fits in with the kind of American culture of the time. I pulled myself together and walked down to Fillmore Street. I crossed there and waited for the number 22 streetcar. So again, we've gone more into kind of recount mode. And there's this juxtaposition, isn't there, between her mum getting into the car and her getting into going to get the streetcar. So my policy of independence would not allow me to accept money or even a ride from my mother. Okay, so she's really self-reliant, wants to be independent, but I welcomed her and her wisdom. So here we can see that she does really have that respect for her mother. Now I thought of what she had said. I thought, suppose she is right. She's very intelligent and often said she didn't fear anyone enough to lie. So there's a sense really there of her mother as this very powerful figure. Suppose I really am going to become somebody. Imagine. Now I think having this in direct speech here as well as the mother again really foregrounds the importance of this moment, and it also gives her autobiography a kind of literary quality. And then so what we're saying here, so we're talking about how she's influenced by her mother. And then basically this last little bit, she has a total shift. This becomes a really profound moment for her, that there's a whole change in her attitude towards herself. And these minor sentences here and at the end here, they're really demarcating a shift and kind of what comes next. You know, imagine, you know, she's thinking about her kind of future life. All of a sudden, this thing that her mother has said to her has changed her whole perception of self, which she foregrounds here. At that moment, when I could still taste the red rice, I decided the time had come to stop my dangerous habits like smoking, drinking, and cursing. So this episode is this huge turning point in her life. She rejects her previous lifestyle. She decides to become kind of more serious, more conscientious. Then we get this minor sentence repeated. Imagine. Repetition of that verb is really showing this kind of new view of her potential. I might really become somebody someday. Okay, so it ends on a really positive note, doesn't it, that someday she might be able to kind of forge this incredible self that her mother sees the potential for.